Russia's losses have crossed 500,000 men, according to the British Ministry of Defense. And in this video, I'm going to show you that the number is very likely true by simply taking Russian numbers, not Western numbers. I will be able to show you that the Russians very likely actually have lost 500,000 men. Other than that, finally permission for the Ukrainian armed forces to strike into Russia, as well as more details about international aid, among them from South America, and more details about military aid from Germany, where, according to the newest reports, Ukraine will get a very powerful IFV in somewhere in the future. But we'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front line, about airstrikes, politics, troop generation, and so much more in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Hello and welcome. The Russians have continued heavy airstrikes. 2 airstrikes were particularly strong over the last few days. Among those airstrikes, they targeted the Ukrainian infrastructure. 2 hydroelectric plants were hit and 2 more thermal power plants. So the electric situation inside of Ukraine is even more dire than before. One of those examples is an airstrike that happened today at night. We see one of those, we see the identified flight paths of the weapons that were used. In this attack, the Russians used 54 missiles, 35 of which were shot down, according to the Ukrainians, and they used 47 Shahid drones, 46 of which were shot down, according to the Ukrainians. Interesting here is that you can clearly see that the aerial munitions try to avoid Kiev, where there's a high concentration of air defense, showing how important mission planning is and how important intelligence is to actually be able to avoid concentrations of enemy firepower. This is just a nice illustration for this fact. The Ukrainians and the Russians also exchanged prisoners of war, 75 against 75, and the internet is full right now about complaints about the situation of the health of Ukrainian prisoners of war. This is an example, a man that has lost a lot of weight. There are tons of pictures showing that Ukrainian prisoners of war were apparently mistreated. At least those are the accusations. On the northern front line, we have the Russians now in Staritsia. This is down here. So in the western part, I do not see any fresh changes that I can confirm. It seems that the Russians are fully stopped, but Ukrainian counterattacks have also not reached anything. Here in Staritsia, we have a geolocalization according to which the Russians are now down here. So more or less here. They might have advanced, they probably have advanced somewhat down the road, but no big change. In Vovchansk, on the other hand, the Ukrainians did counterattacks that were partially successful. We have a geolocalization of Ukrainian troops in here, which is here. So we know that the Ukrainians are still here and do counterattacks towards the north. In the east, on the other hand, in the east of Vovchansk, the Russians have taken foothold here along that road right on the eastern bank, on the eastern part of the city. So the Russians have taken this area here as well. Generally, though, the front line doesn't move much anymore, and the Russians report continuous Ukrainian counterattacks, even though they don't have much to show for. But at the same time, the Russians don't have much to show for anymore in the Kharkiv region either. On the eastern front, we have a Russian success at Novoselivske. This is here. We have a geolocalization for this as well, according to which you can see this piece of wood is very characteristic. It's here, so the Russians have reached that point here, an advance of probably roughly 500 meters in this area. The front line will soon probably be corrected on the maps towards the west here. Also, south of, further south, we have a Russian attack towards Torske, which is right down here, a little bit north of the Siversky Donetsk. Here we have the Russians having attacked in this way, and you see the road making like moving here. And this is here. So we see that the Russians have advanced to this area here. should be here exactly. So another advance of probably 300 meters or something in this ballpark. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have changes in Chasiv Yar, and the situation about Bodanivka is still somewhat unclear to me. So we'll keep checking if something changes here. But in Chasiv Yar, we do have confirmed changes in territory. First of all, we have the Russians being present here inside of the easternmost quarter of the city. They have now taken roughly this part here. This here fell into the Russians. There are some dachas here that we can see on this here. So this area is all under Russian control, roughly up to this here. Has fallen into Russian hands. Also, south of it, we have some change. This is a Ukrainian mill blogger showing that the Russians gained additional ground in here. I think that's actually being called the German forest. Don't ask me why. But this is roughly this area here. According to Petrenko, this would now be under Russian control as well. So some advances here in the direction of Chasiv Yar, and where they've reached the area where the canal is underground, so obviously easier for them to advance in this direction. South of Ivanivske, we have some changes as well. Directly south of Ivanivske, there's a geolocalization here that the Russians have reached this point, and this is here on the map. So another advance of roughly 500-600 meters south of Ivanivske in this area. That was it from this area. We'll continue. We have confirmed changes close to Avdiivka. Here the Russians have advanced in the direction of Sochi. Somewhere here the tree lines fell into Russian hands at this in this area, and they managed to straighten out the front line here west of Semenivka. I think it was the last situation report where I told you that this is the obvious most obvious coming, as the Russians had advanced here, but the Ukrainians still were somewhere in this area. That they would withdraw was obvious, and we see it now that it has happened. Further south at Netailove, we have some changes. The Russians have advanced in the north along the road here, and in the south they have advanced west of that area here that is built up. I think it's agricultural. So this is the agricultural area. The Russians have now taken more or less this area here, and they managed to advance somewhat up that road here. So from Netailove, they are advancing further. And here we also see, as they now control Umanske, this is now under threat and will probably be withdrawn from fairly soon as well. Further south at Krasnohorivka, we have a change, the first change in a couple of days, but barely anything to talk about. The Russians have crossed the road here. This might, obviously, we could speculate that this would give them some advantage, as they no longer have to cross the open area here. Here it's the geolocalization. Maybe this will help them advance further, but it's just showing us now that the Russians have crossed it and are in the first house of an area that we so far considered under their control. Further south, no change that I can confirm. I have no fresh changes south of Velika Novosilka. In the last situation report, I showed you that the Russians have roughly taken 2/3, if not more, of Staromayorsk, but since then, nothing seems to have changed. And further west, we have a change not until after the area of Orekhiv. Here the pro-Ukrainian map still now shows us part in southern Robotine under Russian control. I've read some pro-Ukrainian mill bloggers that the Ukrainians have now evacuated Robotine. If you're regular here, you know that for a week at least I say that according to what I see on the map, Robotine is likely fully under Russian control as of now. The Russians have gained some positions here. They advanced along that tree line here for roughly 800 meters to a kilometer. So a significant advance in this direction, especially as we haven't seen any change in territory west of Orekhiv for quite a while. But that was it already from the changes. About the changes on the front line. South of it, on the Crimean Peninsula, the GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence, is saying that with naval drones they managed to destroy 2 Project KS-701 Tunets. Those are small patrol boats. I think a length of like 15 meters or something plus minus in the ballpark. What is that? 45 yards, 45 feet, like 50 feet at most. So those are really not big ships, fairly cheap to produce, etc. Usually used by the Coast Guard, by the border guards, etc. GOR says they destroyed 2 and damaged 2 more with naval drones. I have yet to see a video showing this, even though it might exist. As said, I haven't said it. Ukrainians also attacked the harbor, a harbor north of Kerch. I think it was somewhere here. No, here, I think. Not completely sure. With ATACMS. The Russians confirmed the attack, obviously claimed that they shot down most of it and just fragments hit the harbor. That might be true, because from the Ukrainian side, they say that ferries were damaged, not destroyed. There were rumors that they used cluster munition as well. So we see that there have been hits in the area, and there is a visual evidence showing that one of the ferries now clearly shows damage. Supposedly 2 ferries are damaged and a pilot boat has sunk. Those, and that's the interesting part, those are ferries for trains. So those are the ships that would make sure that in case the Crimean bridge has been destroyed, that trains can still cross the Strait of Kerch. For this, they are important. So it would indicate that the Ukrainians still aim to destroy the Crimean bridge and take out that supply line in the south. But the full truth is, in this regard, the Crimean bridge no longer has the same significance. This is Tatarigami, a Ukrainian officer who wrote again about that train line we talked about in the past. And I think the highlight of this in this context is our team assesses that this new railroad would suffice to supply the region even if the Crimean bridge is destroyed. Additionally, the railroad reduces travel time from Russia. For more details, etc. So this is, we're talking about this railroad line, which is in operation now, or about to be in operation. This was constructed by the Russians and will make the Kerch Bridge redundant when it comes to supply of the whole southern area. So the Western supply of weapons to destroy the Crimean Bridge, if they are being used, if they are being delivered, and if Ukraine gets the permission to use them, are at least 1 year late and have now lost the majority of its effect. The Ukrainians have struck more on the Crimean Peninsula. Here they say that with drones, they hit an expensive radar system. Now, the prices are always something up for debate, especially as in times of war, money can usually be found in other ways, but the important thing is this is a long-range reconnaissance radar, supposedly a range of over 300 kilometers that close to 400 kilometers surveils the front line, and it was taken out. So the Ukrainian offensive to take out Russian radars and Russian air defense is continuing. They are not able to show any proof. They say they attacked it with drones, and according to them, their sensors showed after the attack the radar was offline. Now, this can mean that it's being redeployed, theoretically at least. This can mean that it was at least damaged or destroyed, but we do not have any proof of a successful strike as of now. What we do have, though, is a successful strike close to Kerch itself. Here on this spit, I think you would call it, is an oil depot. And as you can see, there's a ferry harbor too. And here the Ukrainians struck that, and an oil depot caught fire. The interesting part here is that according to the Ukrainians, they used Neptune. This means that they have enough Neptune to at least occasionally do strikes, a proof of their serial production, and this would mean that they have to have at least 300 kilometer range if we assume that the Neptunes were launched from up here. So, and add some kilometers of security, because obviously they're not being launched from the first trench on the front line. So this would give us a ballpark how far Ukraine can strike with its Neptunes, as they have a proven range of at least 300 kilometers as of now. Generally, about the general situation, the Russians are sending additional reinforcements to Kharkiv. This is confirmed, or this is said by the Ukrainian military. According to them, fresh troops are being deployed and being sent here, so we should expect additional activity by the Russians there fairly soon. At the same time, Germany and the United States have allowed the usage of their weapons against Russian territory. In both cases, it is limited to basically defending Kharkiv to allow the Ukrainians to strike back in the area of Kharkiv to defend against this. ATACMS, the US say ATACMS are still not allowed to be used on Russian soil. GMLRS, so the shorter range missile for HIMARS and the M270s are allowed to be used in this. And according to the reports, it's supposed to be, I guess, only for counter battery fire. I'm not completely sure, and obviously not everything is getting said to us, but I would understand it at least that they are not allowed to, for instance, take out the bridges here, which is would obviously be of massive advantage for the Ukrainians should they be able to take out all the bridges north of that Russian area, of that Russian-held area. Also, the surface-to-air missiles are allowed to be used over Russian territory if they are to defend against strikes, basically to allow the Ukrainians to shoot down planes that would launch glide bombs. Whether they'll be in trouble if they shoot down a helicopter or not is a different story that I can't answer you, but that's at least what's being said. The Ukrainians immediately did that, according to reports. This is missiles being started and reports that barrage was happening in Belgorod, so the Ukrainians immediately used that ability, and I do not have any confirmed results of this strike, though. According to the Financial Times, NATO is having less than 5% of the necessary surface-to-air missile capacity that would be needed in case of an intensive missile and air attacks from the Russians. Less than 5%. I'm not completely sure how much we should take that by its word, because it ignores that the NATO has a far superior air force and obviously has ways to strike the Russians on their own territory without those limitations that the Ukrainians have. And if you take out the bases from which those rocket launchers are being supplied, if you use your own cruise missiles, then you obviously need far less air defense, as well as if you do use your fighter jets to shoot down cruise missiles. So Financial Times says less than 5% of the needed SAM capacity. I'm not fully convinced this is actually the case, but I guess that's up for debate to some degree. And I have to admit that the Financial Times article for me was behind the paywall and I wasn't able to see it. Still, though, the air defense has to be included in a superior air force, which Ukraine, in comparison to NATO, doesn't have. And the British are saying that the Russians have now crossed 500,000 losses. Now, of course, if you are one of my viewers from the other side of the fence, you'll see that as propaganda, but the numbers actually are indicating that this is true, and we can mostly take the Russian numbers for this. Now, at the beginning of the war, the Russians had 200,000 men more or less being sent into Ukraine. They were reinforced by an additional roughly 100,000 men until the mobilization came. Those were volunteers that were being called up. Those were Rosgvardia. Those were the forces that had not yet been deployed but were being sent there. Then the mobilization happened in September of 22. According to the Russians themselves, this mobilization led to an additional 320,000 men, because the Russians said we mobilized 300,000, but another 20,000 volunteered out of patriotic feelings during that time. In 2023, the Russians recruited at least 350 to 400,000 men. Those are the numbers from the GUR. So even the Ukrainians say at the very least the Russians got more or less 400,000 men. I think the Russians themselves, Medvedev must have said something close to 500,000. I might be wrong, but I think it was 484,000. So let's say 400,000 additionally in 2023. And so far, if we take the current numbers from the GUR, it would be at least 150,000 additionally, because if we take 30,000 a month, the Russians said since the Crocus attack, the volunteers spiked, so it should be even more than this. So if we take 100,000 volunteers and 300,000 320,000 mobilization, plus 200,000 at the beginning of 22, plus 400,000 in 23, plus 150,000 so far in this war. Then we are at 1.17 million people, so 1,170,000, and that should not even include the Wagner fighters that were used and have lost their lives in Ukraine. Putin recently said 550,000 soldiers are in the combat zone. He is not just saying the Ukrainian area, but he's also taking the rear areas where they support, where they're involved in this. This leaves 620,000 missing. Now, obviously, there will be some in training centers, but we do know that the Russian forces along its other borders are very thinned out, that there's basically barely anything left at other parts of the front line. So 620,000 are missing. If we assume that some are in training centers, some are here, some are currently constituting new units, that still easily leaves room for 500,000 losses, even if we take mostly the Russian numbers for the overall situation. Now, losses obviously means killed in action, but it also means wounded in action and missing in action. So that doesn't mean the Russians have lost 500,000 killed in action. Killed in action is probably somewhere between 150 to 200,000, somewhere in this ballpark. The Ukrainians will have had serious losses as well, probably over 300,000, which would be my guess, should be in the Ukrainian side as well. But as said, 500,000 losses are absolutely realistic simply by adding the numbers that were recruited and wondering where they have went. Then we have in the political sphere, we have developments in Russia. Russia is setting up a progressive tax system, meaning that the more you earn, the higher the taxes you'll have to pay. And overall, they increase the taxes in 2025. This shows us that Russia's resources are not limitless as well, as shouldn't be too much of a surprise. At the same time, the costs of war aren't just directly growing. Also, there are additional expenses for veterans. For instance, invalids are supposed to get special cars. Families are getting more retirement pay in case they have a fallen soldier in their family. And those costs will not just increase the expenses right now, but they will obviously continue over decades to come. So Russia will have to pay for that war for quite a long time. Even though they have had a political win, as China has said they are not going to participate in Ukraine's peace summit. Ukraine wanted to basically get an agreement by every major player in the world that their idea of a peace is a just one, to then increase pressure on Russia to sign their peace. And now China will not participate, and this cannot be sugarcoated. This is a big loss for Ukrainian side in this conflict. And in international support, we have some news. France is going to start off with a limited number of soldiers to check the situation, to train the Ukrainians. But after that, they expect several hundred French trainers to be in Ukraine to train the Ukrainian troops inside of Ukraine. And we have news about the Czech ammunition initiative. Russia has heard about it, as is not much of a surprise, so they started buying the ammo themselves. I guess that's the disadvantage, that the Czech president publicly said that they have found ammo without securing funding in secrecy first. Now the reports are that the Russians have done as much as possible to buy ammo from the same sources, simply by acting faster and by allocating money faster. And those shells that were delivered to the Czech Republic, a lot of them were in horrible shape. Sometimes some had parts missing. At least half of the ammo that was more than half of the ammo that was bought for Ukraine has to be refurbished inside of the Czech Republic before it can even be delivered to Ukraine. Still though, according to reports, Ukraine will start receiving 50 to 100,000 shells a month from now on. Within the next few days, supposedly, finally, the first shells are going to come. Also, Sweden, Iceland, and Norway have signed security agreements. We talked about Sweden's commitments already in the last situation report, and Iceland will help with 30 million US dollars a year. I mean, we're talking about a tiny country with 300 to 400,000. I think it's 370,000 inhabitants. So 30 million is a fair amount for those. Norway is going to aid with 7.1 billion US dollars until 2027. This year they are going to help Ukraine with 1.2 billion, just Norway itself. They're also going to send additional air defense, that's NASAMS, plus missiles as well as F-16s. Germany is doing another aid package of €500 million, and the Polish sent another aid package, but I didn't find any details about the volume of it, about the size of it. I just found that it was supposedly, I think, the 46 aid package, and that overall the aid has been 8 billion, but to which degree that aid is now of 5 billion, I can't remember. So I don't have any details about the Polish aid, but we do have some details here about the, I'm sorry, let me quickly check it. We have some details. Here it is. We have some details about the IFV that Ukraine is going to get. And they are going to get the Boxer. We said it, we talked about that in the last situation report. And now we have clarification which kind of Boxer it is. It'll receive the RCT-30 turret, a 30mm autocannon that can engage both ground targets as well as air targets. So it can fight enemy IFVs, it can fight enemy MBTs, at least from the side, even though from the front they can still disable them, even though taking them out fully, destroying them is a whole different story. But they can also be used to shoot down drones, and that should obviously be a huge aid to the Ukrainians. The unfortunate thing is I have no details about numbers, and that's obviously the big thing. That thing might be the best IFV that Ukraine is going to get in this war, but if they only get 20, that's not going to make a dent. If they get 2,000, that's a whole different story, but I think we all know which of the two numbers is more likely as of now, but still good news. Also, Argentina is setting up, is currently in the process of probably aiding Ukraine even more. After Javier Milei took the office as president, Argentina has done a U-turn in its foreign policy and sided with the West. This not just led to Ukraine receiving 2 Mi-171 transport helicopters from Argentina, the first military aid, I think, from all of Latin America that was given, thanks to Javier Milei. But now the Ukrainians, according to their own reports, are in the process of negotiating to buy gunpowder from Argentina as well. And Poland is currently considering to train Ukrainian men in Poland, make them ready for war. The interesting part is it seems to be Ukrainians who have fled Ukraine, where Poland said they are generally willing to deport them into Ukraine, to aid Ukraine with its manpower and to help Ukraine get back the men who fled from the conscription. Now the report is that the Polish army might train them, and that would obviously be a big aid both for Ukraine as well as for the men themselves, at least in comparison. We talked in the last situation report that according to the Ukrainians themselves, they have shortened the training for mobilized personnel to 1.5 months. I'm pretty sure it's going to be longer if they are in Poland, so they should have a far better training and thus a much higher survival rate than if they were just sent there and receive only 1.5 months of training. But that was it from me for now. If you like this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current situation, and what do you think the real loss numbers are? And if you have missed it, yesterday I made a video that has a negative subscriber count because a lot of my viewers were mad about me that I dare to talk about the situation, how Ukraine might lose a war, and in which situation that loss of the war might be less devastating than it could be. Well, if you have missed that video, I want to recommend it to you in case you are interested in this as well, even though I said the net subscriber count is actually negative on it, but whatever. I'm not here to just give Ukrainian hurrah messages irrelated to the reality. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, then you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel, but that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.